We're all waiting for the next big thing. We're all waiting for the next big thing. We're all waiting.
Welcome to the next big thing. I'm Wayne Kelly. Our guest today, Darrin Mish, who's a national speaker, trainer, author, entrepreneur, and tax attorney. In fact, he's represented thousands of taxpayers with tax problems with the IRS and various state taxing authorities. He's been named the Practitioner of the Year by the American Society of IRS Problem Solvers and the nation's premier lawyer rating service. He joins me on the phone. Darrin, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Now, listen, you sound like you're the guy because you're teaching CPAs, agents, all kinds of different people about IRS representation.
Exactly. You know, what happened is I actually teach other attorneys, CPAs, and enrolled agents the finer aspects of IRS tax problem resolution. What that means is I've immersed myself for over the past decade in helping taxpayers who owe more money than they can afford to pay to the IRS. I've immersed myself in that practice niche, in that practice area, to the point where I can actually travel around the country teaching these other professionals how to solve their clients' problems with the IRS. It's a funny story how I ended up becoming so competent in that area, and it goes like this. It was probably in the mid-'90s. I was practicing law. I was actually a criminal defense lawyer at the time, and I was out on my own, didn't know a thing about business, and I found myself in a very common situation that lots of taxpayers face, especially small business or self-employed people, and that is I ended up with a tax bill that I could not afford to pay, and it was really scary. It was really stressful. It caused a lot of anxiety, and it's one of those situations where sometimes husbands or spouses don't want to tell their spouse when there's a money problem like that, and that's exactly what I did. I hid it. I covered it up for a while because I was just deathly afraid of what my wife was going to say when she found out that we owed the IRS, several $1,000s. And so, long story made short, when I went looking for help to solve my IRS problem, I couldn't find anyone, and so I figured, well, I'll fall back on this legal education I spent so much money on, and I'll just figure this stuff out myself. And I ended up solving it. It was no big deal. When I went and talked to my wife about the problem, she was very understanding. In fact, she was the one that prodded me to deal with it. She says, this is not the end of the world. You need to, take your head out of the sand and just deal with this situation. You need to figure this out and deal with it. And so I did. And what that did is that led me on a quest to help other taxpayers in that situation. I realized that there was a tremendous need, and there just wasn't a whole lot of help out there available for those people. And as the years went by and I got more and more clients, I got more and more sophisticated at the techniques that I use to help taxpayers solve their problems. And that's how I found myself actually teaching other CPAs, enrolled agents, and attorneys how to solve their problems with the IRS.
You had that feeling of you just wanted to hide, and so it makes you relatable to everybody else who's going through this, because when they get that bill and they get in trouble with the IRS, there's probably an overwhelming feeling of fear.
Oh, absolutely. There's some really common emotions, and I can say this from personal experience. There's a high level of anxiety, there's frustration, there's marital difficulties, there's apprehension. It's one of those situations where you go to bed at night thinking about it, and when you wake up, it isn't gone. It's still there. And so you wake up thinking about it. And so you can imagine, Wayne, that this is something that eventually can consume your life, just this fear. I've had many people come in to my office, and they were afraid that there was people following them. Now, that sounds sort of paranoid to us, just thinking about it and talking about it right now. But that's not paranoid if you're in this situation and it's consumed you. I've had clients come in and sit down and give me fake names because they were afraid that I was going to turn them in. Of course, that's not going to happen. We have attorney-client privilege. I would actually be in severe trouble if I did that. But that's my point is I'm trying to illustrate the level of psychological trauma that this can cause to people, and it's just not necessary.
But there's no secrets that the IRS are keeping from us, right?
Well, that's great. There actually are. There's at least 7 secrets that we've been able to identify, and then we have a special report on our website called The 7 Secrets That the IRS Doesn't Want You to Know About Solving Your Tax Problem. That's available at our website at getirshelp.com. But I'd like to talk about 2 secrets here today that I'm willing to disclose because we don't have that much time. And one of those secrets is that Well, there's a program that Congress has devised called the Offer and Compromise Program. Now, that program's existence is not really a secret. What that program does is it allows taxpayers to make a deal with the IRS to settle for less. That sounds really good, and that's what you see lots of TV commercials late night and whatnot of national companies advertising their services so you can settle for less with the IRS. Now, that's not the secret. The secret is that virtually all offers and compromise are denied out of hand after they're initially filed. So, in other words, the IRS is treating this much like an insurance company where you file a claim and it just comes back denied because some certain very large percentage of the population will just go away and forget about it.
Right.
And so what we're able to do is we're able to use our, over a decade of experience and having handled thousands of cases like this, we're able to use our experience to try to get the offers through on the first time. And if they don't actually go through, here's a little bonus sub-secret, okay? Little sub-secret is everything that the IRS does is appealable. And so if our offers are denied on the first go-around, we file an appeal on behalf of the taxpayer in almost every case, and we go ahead and we get them done at appeal. So that's one of those secrets.
Oh, okay. I'm quite shocked as I did a little bit of research on you beforehand. You were talking about $27,000 paying off a $2.7 million tax problem. Legit?
Yeah, that's a really interesting case. This is a situation where this leads me right into the second secret that I was going to talk about, and that is that there's actually something called a statute of limitations for the collection of income tax.
Okay.
Now, here's what we're going to talk about this in English, okay? In English, that means the IRS only has a certain amount of time to get the money from the taxpayer. I mean, when I found that secret out many years ago, I was blown away. Wait a minute. This is a situation where the government's not going to follow you around for the rest of your life. They only have a certain amount of time to collect it. That's awesome. So it's 10 years from the date of the assessment of the tax. So that leads me into this story where we settled a case for $27,000, give or take, for about $2.7 million liability. This gentleman came in. He was a very high wage earner, which typically means that the cases are harder to deal with. This gentleman was making somewhere between $16,000 and $20,000 a month. So he was not, a destitute individual. And he came in and he was very skeptical. He had already hired 3 lawyers or 3 law firms prior to us, and he was very skeptical that we would be able to help him in any way whatsoever. But I told him to go ahead and trust us, that we would look into it, and that I had a hunch, based on the tax liabilities, the years of the tax returns in question, that the statute of limitations was growing very short. And so what we did is we got a power of attorney signed by him, and which allows us to communicate with the IRS on behalf of the taxpayer. And then we filed something called a Freedom of Information Act request. What that is we get the IRS's playbook, but they don't get ours. So we're allowed to get, through the Freedom of Information Act request, we're able to get documentation from the government so that we can see exactly what has transpired in the particular case. And so we were able to get his information, and I recognized almost immediately that there were somewhere between 18 and 24 months left on the collection statute. I can't remember off the top of my head. And so what we were able to do is we worked out a deal so that he made monthly payments of a couple $1,000s or so, but only until the collection statute expired. And so he got a fantastic resolution when he otherwise might not have, because the government will often ask taxpayers to extend the collection statute, and they usually how they phrase that is to give you more time to take care of this and to pay this off. If he'd have actually filed an extension or agreed to an extension of the collection statute, he would have paid much, much more money in the long run.
All right, Darrin, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to The Next Big Thing with our expert today, tax attorney, Darrin Mish. We'll be back right after this.
We're all waiting for the next big thing. We're all waiting for the next big thing. We're all waiting.
Welcome back to The Next Big Thing with Darrin Mish as our speaker and our guest today, helping us solve some IRS problems. If you've ever had a problem, you know how stressful it is. Now, Darrin, in the last segment, you were talking about, if you can kind of hold off for 10 years. I don't think you're encouraging anybody to just kind of go into hiding for 10 years.
No, absolutely not. Lots of very bad things can happen during that 10-year period.
Okay, good.
So one of the things that we're able to do when we represent clients and we get involved early in the process is we're able to keep those really bad things from happening. happening. Things like federal tax liens, which can severely mess up your credit and keep you from buying or selling a house, for example. We can stop wage garnishments, where the IRS just comes in and takes sometimes 80 or 90% of your paycheck, and we can often stop or reverse bank seizures, where they just come in and one day you go to the ATM to get some money out, and you notice that there's no money in there because the IRS has sucked your account dry.
Okay. Now, a lot of people probably think, well, I can do this myself. Tell me why they should be dealing with you here on The Next Big Thing.
Well, it's kind of like a brain surgeon operating on themselves. It's one of those situations where if you try to handle this yourself, you can't be objective. You know, it's very hard. When I actually handled my own case early on, my first instinct was not to handle it myself. I wanted some help because I wanted someone who had been there, done that before, who'd had the experience handle it for me. But I didn't have that luxury, and now, you know, more than 10 years later, we have more options as far as that goes. But it's also one of those situations where I personally have handled thousands of cases, and we've seen just about everything that can go wrong in one way, shape, or form. What I mean is taxpayers who don't give us all the documentation that we need, or IRS employees who just kind of go sideways and do their own thing and don't follow the law. And so those thousands of impressions, those thousands of cases has given us that experience and confidence to know that no matter what happens, you know, things are going to be okay. We don't have catastrophes, but you do get curveballs from time to time, and so we just have that experience to take care of that if things don't go well. And virtually no case goes exactly the way it's supposed to go, even though we've handled thousands and thousands of them in the past.
You know what I feel a little nervous about, though, at this point, is that 90% of bankruptcy lawyers don't really know the rules. This is what I found out from you. Is that true?
Actually, bankruptcy is one of the solutions that we will sometimes recommend to taxpayers, but by far it's not the most common solution.
Okay.
But taxes can be discharged in bankruptcy under certain circumstances. Here we're talking about income taxes, not payroll taxes, okay? Not the kind of taxes that get withheld from your paycheck as far as on behalf of the employer, but the type of taxes that you didn't pay on your Form 1040. So let me go over those rules real fast. They're kind of esoteric. They're a little bit hard to remember, but I think I can explain it really well. If the tax returns in question have been due more than 3 years, including extensions, then that's one prong that's been satisfied. Okay. If the returns were filed late, as long as they've been filed for 2 years, then that's the second prong. And the third prong is that the taxes in question that we seek to discharge must have been assessed for at least 240 days. Now, I don't really expect anybody to understand that legalese that I just threw at you, but the point is that there's very, very strict timing rules that are involved with the discharge of income taxes in bankruptcy. And so what you do, you need to find someone who's very comfortable with those rules. What we do is, again, we use the Freedom of Information Act request to get transcripts from the government, and then I use software, very sophisticated software that's not even available anymore, to put in the correct dates so that I get out the correct dates that we can file bankruptcy. And it's frightening and disheartening that over 90% of bankruptcy attorneys don't even know that taxes can be discharged in bankruptcy.
Why can't I just call the IRS and hope to get somebody who has a heart? And don't laugh yet. And ask them, okay, here's where I sit. I can't pay this bill. What can we do?
Well, have you ever heard that old cliche, I'm from the government and I'm here to help? Well, that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Okay.
You know, there are instances where you can call the government and you might get somebody who is kind-hearted and helps you out. But more often what we see is that the IRS employees work for the government. They're bill collectors, period. That's their job, is to get as much money from the taxpayer as fast as they can, and they will use whatever weapon in their arsenal, legal or illegal, to get the money, okay? So the difference between the taxpayer who's probably only been in this situation this one time versus the IRS employee who handles these situations day after day after day is, you know, the experience level is really vast and diverse. I mean, there's no chance that your average taxpayer is going to know what's going on versus the IRS employee. Let me give you a real quick example of what happens. You might get what's called a final notice of intent to levy, which is a document that tells the IRS is telling the taxpayer, hey, if you don't respond to us within 30 days, we're going to levy your assets. That means we're going to seize assets of yours. We're going to garnish your wages. We're going to seize your bank account. We're going to do those types of bad things I talked about that we could stop. But you have 30 days to file an appeal to take care of that. Well, your average taxpayer will get this letter. They're very alarmed. Immediately they will call, because that's what the letter tells them to do. They'll call, they'll speak to an IRS employee, and they'll ask the IRS employee, can I get some more time to deal with this? And it usually goes like this: of course you can. Here's your deadline, which just happens to be after the 30 days. Now, interestingly, when you call that second time, after your appeal rights are gone, it's not a warm and friendly conversation anymore.
Wow.
Because they've got you over the barrel. Now they've got the big stick that they can, whack you over the head with when they need to. But they're real nice on that first option, that first call, because they want to get you past their appeal rights.
Wow. Okay, that's very interesting. Where do you see this trending? Up or down? Better or worse?
Well, all we have to do is open the newspaper just about every day,
Yeah.
and we see that the federal deficit is growing and growing. And so I don't think it's rocket science to see that the government needs their money, and they need it pretty much now, if not yesterday. And so I believe that the trend is going to be increased enforcement. I've been doing this a long time, over 10 years, and I've already seen a trend in the last couple years of the IRS chasing smaller and smaller balances, sometimes as low as $1,000. They'll pull the big guns out, and they'll go ahead and seize that money from your bank account, or file a wage garnishment on you so that they can get paid, and they can get paid, as soon as possible.
Is there ever too little of an amount for us to call you?
I would say that typically speaking, it's not going to make a whole lot of economic sense for us to represent you unless you owe $20,000 or more. See, when I represent a client, what we're doing is I'm aiming for a 10-to-1 return on investment. Okay, so if you have a $5,000 tax liability, it's going to be pretty hard for me to provide you that 10-to-1 return on investment. But if you have a $20,000 or more liability, it's going to be a whole lot easier. It's going to make a whole lot more sense. That being said, if listeners have a smaller tax liability, they can certainly feel free to give us a call, and we will definitely point them in the right direction. Because my point, what I'm trying to do here, is I'm trying to solve that psychic pain and trauma that taxpayers face when they have a tax problem and they don't know where to turn.
And
they don't know what to do.
You have a tremendous amount of information on your website. People can go there. It's getirshelp.com. Darrin, a pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate it.
We're always